Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch. Hello, Ben. How are you?
G'day, mate. How you going?
Mate, I'm fabulous. The sun is out. Got to ride the boys back to school today. Lockdown ended at 11:59 last night. How could we not be any better?
We're having our 1 week of summer. Yes. Down here in Melbourne and the Surf Coast, 1 week of summer.
Isn't that true?
We get like 4 or 5 days of over 30. That's like, we call this the Indian summer. It always comes in late February.
Oh, yeah. But all the locals down here say March is the best time to be, so I'm keeping that in mind. I'm staying optimistic. But hey, you got a little story, Ben. I'd like to unpack. On Friday, you were at the airport. How'd you go? Tell us the story.
Oh, well, you know, I was heading up for a 50th birthday in Sydney. Jamie, our CEO, his 50th birthday. So very excited, Bryce. And, you know, we were obviously watching the COVID situation play out. And, so our flight's at 4 o'clock, right? So I was sort of because it's a fun little story. It doesn't end well, but it's a fun story. Flight's at 4 o'clock. Premier comes on and says, that's it, lockdown from midnight tonight, right? Okay, that's all right. We're still going in for it. We get there
before midnight. Yeah.
There's Jamie and I have been mates for many, many years, as well as another mate of mine, Jason. So we're flying out. My wife's coming the next day. So here we are. We're at the airport. It's 40 minutes before our flight, and we get a text message from Jamie's wife telling us that there's a press conference at 4 o'clock that's going to announce that New South Wales is locking down to anyone who's arriving from Victoria. And we're like, oh, okay, well, right, that's not good news, but surely that's fine, because if they're locking down for the same period as Victoria, that'll start at midnight, but we get there at 4 o'clock, so we'll be free to roam around. So I send a text message back and say, so when does this effective on? And the New South Wales Health Department confirms it's the 29th of January.
Oh,
huh? What? What? Wait a minute. So people who are already there are going to have to go into lockdown. And so we're sitting there going, right, so we're going to arrive in Sydney, go to our hotel and have to stay there until we fly out on Sunday.
It's not fun.
Not going. Yeah. So we were sitting there like, so just what a letdown, right? So I can't believe it. Are we absolutely sure? Yeah, we're absolutely sure. So Jason gets his bag offloaded. We have one quiet ale and then head out for our dinner in Melbourne because it's going into lockdown. So we thought we'll take advantage of that. And then it's 8:30. We're back at my place, just sort of, dusting off our bruises and wiping our tears. and then the announcement comes through that actually, no, we're going to make it from midnight tonight. So in other words, if we had flown got there, the 29th of January was no longer a policy. So this is what I end up with: a credit with my flights with the great Qantas, and basically $500 in cancellation fees for the two hotels that we were going to stay in for the 2 nights in Sydney, that I now have to argue to say, we didn't come because, and then trying to find the old, the original media announcements from the Health New South Wales where it said the 29th of January versus, you could have come and you could have stayed, and so it's been, so there's 5 hours of my life in terms of trying to argue with the hotels to get the cancellation fees back. But there you go. So it was very disappointing for us to not be able to enjoy the party. But good news for Jamie, he was able to go because he was down in Melbourne
on the 29th.
Yeah. So he's down in Melbourne in early February. So all of a sudden his party's not going ahead because the guest of honour
can't turn up
to his own party.
Well, he could have gone virtual.
Wow, yes. How
could have gone on Zoom.
Anyway, so it turned out well for him. It's just that unfortunately we couldn't get to go. But it was a bit of fun. I mean, and they had a great time. And we, to everyone's credit, we were told the right information at the right time, but it just changed. And so, bit of fun.
And for all those folks who were severely affected, if you had a restaurant or something where your business was shut down, we obviously understand that it's a privileged story that we're talking about here, and there's people that are very, very well off, worse off than that. But you're right, Ben. It's even though there's people doing it worse, it's still frustrating for you. And
it's just living in a COVID environment for the time being.
We had a bucket list restaurant booked for Saturday, like serious bucket list restaurant down here at 45 minutes away. Organised 2 nights for the kids to be looked after by the grandparents.
Pause.
It was, So
it happens. It happens. All right.
So we're back out of
about part 2. Super excited about part 2.
So last week we talked about how to buy in a hot market. Part 1. This week it's part 2. I'm excited about doing that. Little bit of housekeeping here, Ben.
Sure.
Just a shout out to Leighton Cantrell, one of our listeners, who guessed when we did 9 million downloads, put out the call. What date do you think we will get to 10 million? Leighton was nearest the pin.
Nice one. Great stuff, Leighton.
Start and build course went to Leighton. So congratulations to you. Also, Instagram. I just want to encourage all the Instagram folks to come over and play over on our page. We are delivering high quality content. So not just pictures. We're doing lots of stuff, but there's content where you can actually learn every single day over there and over on Facebook too. But if you're on your smartphone now and you want to mosey on over and have a look, there'll be more stuff coming out today. More stuff.
I'd have a look now, mate. Now that Facebook has decided they're not going to do news content, so it's great. You just get educational content instead.
Yeah, I like it. So, and Ben, you've got something too.
Yeah, just quickly on the picker. Put my picker hat on. For those of you who missed Ross Lacane's excellent deep dive into investment savvy mortgage lending, that's available on demand for members on the website. And Mary and the team in New South Wales, I'll tell you what, have done some great work on developing a calculator, a brand new calculator, a deep dive calculator into stamp duty changes. And so that is going to be uploaded onto the website. But we're also going to do a training webinar on that next Tuesday night, the 23rd. So again, if you're not a member, you won't be notified of this. So $5 for a year or $20 for 5 years. And that will also be on demand as well. So there'll be an announcement coming out to also register for that webinar for next Tuesday night. Stand by. Thank you, guys.
Oh, very good value there. So you should go and check that out, folks. All right, Mindset Minute theme today, Ben. I finished part 3 of the book. So today's chapter finishes part 3, again part 4, and then
nice.
we're almost at the end. But so today is chapter 20, and when nothing else works, try this. So Charles Schwab had a mill manager whose people weren't producing their quota of work. So how is it, Schwab asked him, that a manager as capable as you can't make his mill turn out what it should? I don't know, the manager replied. I've coaxed them in, I've pushed them, I've sworn and cussed, I've threatened them with damnation and being fired, but nothing works. They just won't produce. This conversation took place at the end of the day, just before the night shift came on. Schwab asked the manager for a piece of chalk, then turning to the nearest man asked, how many heats did your shift make today? 6. Without another word, Schwab chalked a big figure 6 on the floor and walked away. When the night shift came in, they saw the 6 and asked what it meant. The big boss was in here today, the day people said. He asked us how many heats we made and we told him 6. He chalked it on the floor. You know what's coming up, don't you, Ben?
Mm-hmm.
The next morning, Schwab walked through the mill again. The night shift had rubbed out 6 and replaced it with a what? A big 7. When the day shift reported for work the next morning, they saw the big 7 chalked on the floor. But the night shift thought they were better than the day shift, did they? Well, they would show the night shift a thing or two. The crew pitched in with enthusiasm, and when they quit that night, they left behind them an enormous swaggering 10. Things were stepping up. Shortly, this mill, which had been lagging way behind in production, was turning out more work than any other mill in the plant. The principle that Charles Schwab said in his own words. The way to get things done, says Schwab, is to stimulate competition. I do not mean in a sordid, money-getting way, but in the desire to excel. The desire to excel, the challenge, throwing down the gauntlet, an infallible way of appealing to people of spirit. So principle number 21, Ben, is throw down a challenge. So as I mentioned, that's the end of part 3 done, which was winning people to your way of thinking. So principle 10, the only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it. 11, show respect for the other person's opinions. Never say you're wrong. 12, if you're wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. Got anything to say about presidents of football clubs in that one? Or are you happy to leave that alone?
I'll leave that.
Hey?
I'll
leave that one alone. 13 is begin in a friendly way. 14, get the other person saying yes, yes immediately. 15, let the other person do a great deal of the talking. 16, let the other person feel that the idea is his or hers. 17, try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. 18, be sympathetic with the other person's ideas and desires. 19, appeal to nobler motives. 20, dramatize your ideas. And principle 21, throw down a challenge. We are making our way through this book, folks. Hopefully it's helping you. Let's kick on to today's show, Ben. Everything you need to know about buying in a hot market, part 2, which is interesting. Interesting to know, Ben, that between last week and this week, none of the heat has actually left the market. So it's as relevant today as it was last week for us to be talking about this topic.
I expect it's going to be relevant for a couple of months at least.
Yes, exactly. So Bill Evans talked recently in his address about the fact that the next couple of years are going to be busy in the property market because of the way that the property market leads us out of economic recovery. And so at some point in the future, there will be a handbrake dropped for macro-prudential, or have to. But in the meantime, they will be happy to let it run because that is how we will recover as an economy and create more jobs and get more people working and get this place back in an orderly fashion.
Yeah, Bill Evans is the chief economist for Westpac Group. So for those of you who are new to him, he's a highly respected and someone we certainly lean on in terms of predictions around growth and also interest rates and the world economy. But he's playing catch up a little bit on the property market at the moment. He's a ripper.
So last week we talked about the backstory as to why we're in the position we're in, how to get your brief in place, and then what prep you need to be doing. This week we are going to be talking about 2 things. One is the search for the property, and then 2 is the due diligence around that search for the property. So I guess a couple of things for people to realise, I'll kick it off here, Ben, is listings are tight. I've moved to the Gold Coast when that started booming. I moved to Melbourne when that started booming. I've been in booming markets pretty much my whole career because that's what we do, right? We put people into booming markets, or in strong markets is probably a better way to describe that, because we want them to be in front of the curve and enjoy the ride.
Yep.
But I've never been in a situation where every major and secondary market is smoking. It's just this stock tightness is universal across the country, right? So getting listings is difficult for real estate agents, and that is playing into part of the challenge that we're finding ourselves in this hot market. But I just wanted to explain the difference between on-market, off-market, and advanced listing, because it's really important, and it's really important that you know these terms because you're trying to play in this game. A lot of people talk about off-markets, which is essentially a property. If you're living in a house now, the one next door may transact without the public really knowing, because the person didn't want any public campaign. They've got a relationship, say, with a real estate agent. That agent said, oh, look, I've got 2 or 3 buyers that I reckon would be interested in buying that. You don't have to pay for any marketing. Let's get the deal done. So it transacts, and before you know it, you can see a removal truck out the front with the person moving out and a removal truck with the person coming in. You've gone, what just happened? I did not even see that coming. That is a genuine off-market where it is really a mystery to the general market, versus the opposite, Ben, which is pretty clearly there's a sign out the front. There's opens. If you have it open in the current environment, there's 190 people waiting outside to come through, socially distanced to get through. And clearly then there's, whatever level of marketing that the vendor has gone through, there's a campaign of awareness, and then they go through the campaign. So there's off-market, there's on-market, but what the space that you need to be playing in now is the advanced listing space. And it's not easy to do because it requires you to be networked. But basically what you are doing is you are getting advance notice of a listing that will go on market, but you're getting a bit of lead time to prep yourself to do it, because ultimately that is going to help you win the game, because speed is everything in this game. So advanced listings, if that's not something that's been on your radar, that's what we want to drum into you today. It's going on the market in 2 weeks' time. You find out about it today. Yeah.
So sometimes people refer to this as pre-market. So, but it is an advanced listing. Exactly right. Also, we're trying to talk about in a marketplace, the context is very much a seller's market, which is a tough buying market. So if anyone is offering you an off-market, I'm not sure that that's a bona fide off-market deal, because any agent worth their salt would take anything to market in this current environment to get the best outcome for the vendor. So the only time that you would probably think about an off-market in terms of, because the first question you're asking if you do get offered an off-market from an agent is, why are they selling? And if there is a story about, look, they don't want the neighbour to know or something along that, that might be a reason why, because there could be a story there. But in reality, normally most off markets which aren't worth their salt, which is what Bryce was talking about before, is because that is a buyer's market and the agent's hoping to get a really inflated price from someone who may not have done their due diligence and knows the value. So from that point of view, that the pre-market, the advanced listings is the spot. And I'll reiterate just what Bryce said: speed. Speed is everything, and that'll come down to the finance question later in this episode as well.
Yeah, and I used an analogy about the surf last week. I think it's helpful. It's like paddling for a big wave, and once you're committed, you've got to go. Otherwise, you're going to get crunched, right? So it's a bit like that as well. But you mentioned not about off markets. Just for clarity, there are good off markets and there are bad off markets.
Correct.
And so what you want to do is be really clear on, sure, an off market find or an off market get is good as long as the asset stacks up. Or as long as the reason for the asset being sold stacks up, like you said before, getting a premium price. But we as a team have been buying a fair bit off market, Ben. And I was chatting to the crew yesterday, and they said, "Look, that's actually even drying up for us, and that's with people who prefer to deal with us. They know we're professional. We know we're not there to muck around. They know it gets done. Professionals like dealing with professionals. It's just a reality, right?" Yeah. And they said, "Look," to the team, "look, those off markets, we probably won't be able to get you them off market anymore. What we'll do is we'll give you an advanced listing, and we'll give you a fair bit of intel about where it's at, which is another advantage you have as being a professional buyer. Yep. But we can't do it legitimately off market." And you sort of think, okay, that's fair enough. Like what you said, why wouldn't they take it to market, the best outcome for the vendor? No, they want to take it to the market because they want to get their next listing, because listings are so hard to come by in this current environment. They need some profile. They need to get some photos on some boards. They need to meet some buyers, because it's people coming through who are buyers quite often are sellers. And so they want to actually have those conversations with those buyers who are sellers so they can try and get their next listing. So it's actually just a reality of the market when it's so thin that real estate agents have got to eat too. And they've got to be as strategic as they can to get a listing. So off markets, I'm not saying they're not available, because that's just not true. They are available, but they are becoming scarce and skinny because the agents need the profile as well. So advanced listings is the sweet spot. That's where it's at. If you want to seriously compete in this market, you need to start getting networked. You need to let the agent know you're interested. You need to let the agent know that you're prepared to move fast. And you need to let the agent know a couple of things that we're going to talk about a bit later today, Ben, that you're good to go. You're a serious person. You're about to catch the wave, and it's not going to crunch on you, and someone else will miss a good ride going forward.
Bryce, this is why you are the buyer's agent who's bought in every state and territory in the country, and why we go to you for your subject matter expertise in this area. Tell us about the next point we want to talk about, which is around the search plan.
Well, the search plan.
Backstory on that.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's really hard to price at the minute. It's really hard to price at the minute. So it's important that you do the best thing that you can to actually get a sense of where the pricing is at. So a lot of people go into the buy tab on REA or Domain or whatever their portal of choice is. But that tab's not really going to help you because of quoting mismatch in all across the country, whether some sections quote pretty close, other sections underquote, whatever it is. So just go to the sold tab. Now we have access as a resource to every sale in the country. So, but we pay money for that resource, right? So for people who don't have the money to pay for that resource, just go to the sold tab. Go and have a look at what recently sold, because 9 times out of 10, the price is there. And then you get a better sense of what it was. And if you're doing a lot of research, you can actually go and cross-reference it back to the price guide and then put the sale guide, because you can start to develop some patterns. In a particular, you might be in a region where price guides are close to sale guides. You might find there's a pattern with a particular agent. All these sorts of things are going to help you be in a position, because we're going to say it again, speed is what you need to be in this market. So speed also means you'll be able to, when a property comes up, you need to be able to assess it quickly. So you need to be able to do your homework. So the search plan around what do I think I'm going to be able to pay? Because everyone's fearful of paying too much. And that fear of paying too much can often put amateurs out of the game. They're not positioned quick enough to buy. So that is my number one tip to help people get a better sense of what the prices are, because anything before Christmas, not going to help you. Any sales before Christmas, that's it wasn't at the end of last year. We're like, don't use any of the comps back in March or April, because that was at the peak of it. Don't use any comps in November and December, because that's not going to help. You need to know what's happened in January and February.
And so how do I become a better specialist in price point, Bryce? Explain that a little bit more for me.
Well, here's the deal, because and those listeners who are listening now, they will appreciate this because they've just been through it. But you become an expert at a price point very quickly. Like if you're playing the game properly, you're turning up at opens, you're watching sales, you're chatting to people. If you think about a real estate agent, they might have a listing at 500,000, 800,000, 1.2 million. Some of the better ones might be at 2.5 million. They've got this whole range, right? But if you're in that 600 sweet spot, you know every agent who's got properties in that 608 spot. So they only know their listings, and generally they don't go through other. Sometimes they do, but generally they don't go through other sales agents'
Not
listings.
in a quick market, they don't.
No. So you can actually become more. I was going to say smarter. That's not right. You can become more informed at a certain price point. Features, orientation. Why did that one go better than that one? Than some of the real estate agents. So don't underestimate your own ability to become a specialist in your price points, because you're effectively micro-niching into a very specific. You might be buying a 2-bedroom apartment in 3 suburbs. You might be buying a 3-bedroom townhouse in 4 suburbs, or a house. You become hyper-focused. That's all you think about. That's all you talk about. You know the differences. And I promise you, the real estate agents aren't sitting at home comparing to the nth degree that you are in that little season of your life when you're trying to get in the game. So it's important to understand you can become the expert at that price point.
You are going into a battle, and that's probably a good segue into the asset selection piece. And we've talked a lot about in a general market, balanced market, buyer's market, seller's market, around owner-occupier appeal. And that's ultimately what we're trying to get you attuned to as an investor. So if we've got an investor's hat on, we want you to be attuned to, at the end of the day, outside of sort of mining towns or people chasing yield and speculative markets, in a historical market sense, 70% of buyers are owner-occupiers, 30% are investors. So we want to basically have an owner-occupier mindset and get on their coattails. So Bryce, let's talk now about asset selection and what are the critical things in terms of what you would set as your deal doers versus your deal breakers.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that, because often people can get really confused. They're looking at 3 properties, 4 properties, and my advice is always narrow it. You should only ever be comparing to 2. So you're looking at properties. You've got to say you've got 3 properties, narrow it down to 1, and then discount the other ones, and then move on to the next one. So you're actually looking at 2, and then you're sort of deciding between the 2 which one you want to actually have, and scrap the other one and keep moving. Because what happens is if you've got 6 or 7 properties, that is a recipe for disaster, because you'll be so confused you won't be able to move quick. Because remember, folks, it's all about speed. Mm-hmm. So part of doing that, what we do as a professional buyer for an owner-occupier brief is tell us your top 3 deal makers and tell us your top 3 deal breakers, because they are always going to be very helpful when the inevitable comes that you've actually got to make a decision. Property comes up, you've got to move. If you're in a state of inertia, or you're just sort of dizzy on what to choose, you're going to be in trouble. So when that emotion comes along and said, I love this property, I'm falling in love with this, because if you're always referencing it back to your top three, you go, well, one of my top three is not on a major road and this one's on a major road. All right, just keeps you grounded on what was important before you get sucked into that inevitable motion that kicks on. So have your top three deal doers and your top three deal breakers. Now for investors, that's kind of different. It's usually about suburb selection, yield. It's all about numbers. But for the owner occupiers, it's about practicalities and some emotional content. But remember, we've always on this podcast focused on owner occupier appeal, because we actually want to get into the slipstream of owner occupiers. We don't want to get into the slipstream of investors. So we want them to drive the market. We want to get sucked along for the ride. So it's important to understand what that is if you're buying as an owner occupier. But it's also helpful to know if you're buying an investor trying to chase the coattails of this particular buyer segment.
So let's help you with those deal makers and those deal breakers. I mean, because if you're new to this, or if it's your first investment property, or you're buying your first home, part of that story is going to be around things like what we call attributes, and also some of the other sort of what we call not easy to explain, or the unusual sort of thing. So I want to start with attributes first, and I'll tell a little story about this, because what normally happens in these types of tough buying markets is when we start our search, we have a budget, right? We have a budget in our minds, and we do have a preferred suburb. Usually go back to, our buyer's decision quadrant. What do we get for our money? And a lot of the times we find ourselves going to a renovator's delight, or something that's got a bit of extra uplift to do, and it's quoted in our price range, and we get really excited by it. Well, I just want to give you the heads up in terms of the prep work. If you stumbled on a really strong demand market, and it is a renovator's delight, or it's in your price point, just be prepared that there's going to be thousands of people. Oh, it's an exaggeration, but there's going to be hundreds of people that are going to go through that property. Anyone from a developer, builder who's going to potentially flip it, to obviously other aspiring people to get into that right suburb, and they're looking to that entry level into that suburb. So in these types of markets, just be prepared to move quickly, and try and get it pre-auction if you can, because these things usually do run in that particular thing. So that's where it comes down to, obviously going back. Now, if you want to know the buyer's decision quadrant, there's plenty of episodes on that. Just use the search function.
Oh, go to InstaBen. We've done a little thing on Insta. Yes.
Yeah, so location, the style of the property in terms of that is, whether it's got owner occupier appeal, it's got character and charm, those types of things. Is it weatherboard? Is it brick? Are you going to be happy with a weatherboard property? What's the minimum number of bedrooms that you'll settle with? And do you need a study now that potentially you're going to be doing a little bit more work from home? What sort of lifestyle requirements? Has it got two different living zones? One where you can, the kids can hang around, or you can have some private adult time. Those types of things are going to be part of potentially building out your wish list. And then when it comes to walking through the property, and we've talked about this before, how's the property laid out? Where's the natural light coming through? What's the orientation of the, where's the space and the storage and all of those types of things? Now, what you've got to do is work through those to sort of say, and school zones and amenity in the area. So that's that human interest and human behavior stuff that we've talked about. Work through those lists and try and score them for your top three for deal makers and top three for deal breakers. And that will help you in your selection process to get down to what Bryce was saying before. Finally, that one that is your preferred, and that secondary property, which might be your backup.
And Ben, you talked before about the style in terms of brick and weatherboard. It's important to understand that, let's use Melbourne or Sydney as an example, but you get these beautiful old character properties that punch well above their weight for return, right? If 7% every, gives you a 10-year doubling cycle, these old charms often do it shorter period of time. They've usually got an outperformance, right? But it's important to understand, to get that outperformance, you will need to tap into a little bit of that outperformance to maintain it. These old girls, quite often they have stump issues. Quite often it's difficult to actually get a builder to look underneath the floors. So you have to make a judgment call. So just be mindful of the personality that you are. If you don't like surprises, you're probably not suited to some of these weatherboard charmers. because you literally cannot get under some of them, and then you might find later, because in the journey of owning these older style properties, as I said, you're going to get the on the pro side, you're going to get the outperform result. On the con side, you're probably going to get a higher maintenance than you would for brick, for example. And sometimes you might be planning for that maintenance to happen in 10 years' time, and all of a sudden you buy it, and 18 months later you see something when you think, oh, I kind of hope that wasn't going to happen now. But you get it back in spades, and you're leveraging some of the growth that comes from it. But it's just important to be realistic around that, because everyone talks about the charm of these period homes, but there are things that you need to consider. And if you are a personality type that you like certainty, you like predictability, just keep it in mind. You might be more suited to buy in the same suburb a brick house that doesn't have that same outperform result, but it gives you more certainty around your expenses. So that's something to keep in mind as well, because I've seen it many, many times where they get 9s and 10% per annum compounding growth performance, Ben. So they are amazing on the balance sheet, but they can give some cash flow anxiety to people when they're trying to get to that maintenance issue.
Yeah, and look, I mean, at the end of the day, most people who are looking at property, and when they work out what their top 3, deal doers are versus deal breakers are, what you'll find is that people will make that decision based on the reflection of who they are. Some people are super house proud and they want that status and appeal. Other people are like practicality, just does everything I need it to do. And if I want to work on the garden or whatever, I can do that. Land size. Obviously, we talked before about busy roads and, what are you going to compromise on? We recommend you steer clear of busy roads. But we do see, people who are buying those properties because ultimately they've worked past the busy road concept because they've got themselves into the right suburb, a suburb that they feel really comfortable in, maybe safety and those types of things and security. And that was all part of the buyer's decision. As an investor, we want that mainstream appeal, but we don't want to potentially be looking at very homogenistic sort of stock. Because that individualization that you can potentially achieve will do nothing for you, because ultimately your property is going to be compared to the other homogenistic stock going forward. And that's why we've been always very careful about and cautious about medium high density from a supply point of view, but also from the fact that it's just homogenistic. And then if someone's a desperate seller, your property is going to be valued against that desperate seller price point. So that's something that's really important. Obviously, the final one there is land size. At the end of the day, it's land that appreciates. That is the thing that does most of the heavy lifting. But when you get into those character and charming locations, people invest in their properties, and that pulls the land value up over time. Because at the end of the day, all properties are technically depreciating in terms of wear and tear in their cost base. So that's also an important story there. Let's move on, Bryce, in terms of dealing with the agent. What's the important part of the conversations you want to be having with agents?
Well, it's important to understand what you're about to experience. If you're in the market, you're probably already fully aware of this, but you're going to stand in big lines. If you're in Melbourne, for example, you're going to be in a major social distancing regulations compared to other areas. But you are going to have to go in on a short window of time based on the amount of people, and you're going to have to sum up a property. And here's the reality, folks. We're buying properties for our clients where we have done all of the DD, everything in advance in a not so hot market. We can normally ring the agent and say, hey, listen, you've got an open on Saturday. Can we come through Thursday afternoon? Yeah, no problem. Because they're happy to, chew up their time with a professional buyer. At the moment, the agent's saying, nah, see you at the open on the weekend, right? So we have to go through at the same time as everyone else. So here's the deal. We have to done 99.999% of the work before that initial open that we see for the first time. Because normally offers are being made 5 minutes after the open completes, right? So you can't turn up at an open and go, okay, that's good, and get in the car and think about it and, okay, how are we going with deposit? And do we need to call the... No, that needs to be done in advance. So we need to have some tips on what you're going to do when you go in an open, right? Because you're going to be crowded. If you're lucky, you're in a crowded open. If you're unlucky, you're in a big lineup out the front, putting your COVID barcode on, and you get your 3.6 minutes in the house quickly. But I say lucky if it's crowded because you get to spend a bit more time in there. But you're gonna have to be assessing really quickly with a lot of people, making a lot of conversations, and some people trying to put you off by saying, "Oh my gosh, look at the floors they're leaning," and all sorts of game plans or gamesmanship. But you're going to eventually walk out with a feeling, and there's two feelings: a feeling that I really love it, or a feeling that it's just a bit weird or awkward. And you've got to be able to define why that is. So I want to give people a framework on what that is, because generally it's one of 3 or 4 things. If it feels really great, it's because it had great natural light, felt really roomy, the floor plan actually worked, the orientation was fine. It just felt right, but you might not be able to quickly work out what it is. So think about that. Space, did it have good feeling of space? Was the light really great? Did the floor plan make sense? Bedrooms, then services, then living, then entertainment is your textbook sort of south to north orientation on your floor plan. If you can't put your finger on it, it's usually one or a couple of those things. But equally, if you walk out and you go, "Oh, this is the one where it's really important. Oh, that just didn't quite feel right, and I can't put my finger on it," it's usually because it's the opposite. It probably felt a bit dark, or it felt a bit rabbit warren-y, or it might have been south facing on a cold day, or it just felt cramped, or so again, it's important to actually put some frameworks around what these feelings are, because if you're gonna have to move quickly and you're gonna have to put in an offer after the open, you're going to need to know what you're dealing with. You're going to need to take it out of your heart and into your head so that you can actually make a logical decision about what's going on. So that might be helpful for a few folks, Ben.
Yeah, no, super helpful. And even when you're just pulling up to the location, aspect, views, tree line streets, activity in the street, opposite parks, all of those little elements are building your story. But just also be mindful they're building the story of the other 30 people in the line as well. All right. So, so you're not going to steal this property is the message here. And being able to act, and obviously the terms and conditions are going to be part of that. So,
well, a lot of people are really fearful about the agent knowing their upper limit, right? So in this market, the agent might know your upper limit. If you're at last week's auction, you were the bridesmaid and you didn't get it, but you put your last bid in at 778. They know you're at least at 778, right? So I would say in a market where you've got to move fast and you've got to let the agent know that you're realistic, and don't be overly fearful of them knowing what your budget is, because the biggest fear is that they're going to try and pick your pocket. Well, newsflash, agents are trying to pick everyone's pocket at the moment because it's probably the best conditions they've experienced for some time. But you can make sure that you position the conversation talking in value. So if they know that your top bid's 778, but the property you're looking at is only worth 750, be credible. Hey, listen, Smith Street sold for 738, Jones Street sold, so that you actually can come across as someone who knows value, so that they can't actually just pull the wool over your eyes to actually get it done. So that's number one. So in this market, don't be so fearful, because generally you try and keep your cards close to your chest, you take a little bit of time, all those sorts of things. Don't get hung up on that. And 2, go back to what we talked about before, that even comparables from 3 weeks ago might have moved. So again, it's, if you get the fundamentals right, we did last week, we're plan in place, we know what we want, we know what the price point is, we get to find it, we'll talk about all that. All of the 99.99% of the work is done in advance. Then don't let yourself get hung up on that, because you might get too cute. If the agent doesn't need you at the moment, they've got an abundance of buyers. It's a press hard 4 copy game at the minute. So you need to position yourself as credible to the real estate agent, and you know what you're talking about, and you're only going to buy on value. You're not just going to get carried away with anything that they say to you.
Correct. And I'll just add a couple of things in there. Look, there are some big egoed agents out there, and at the end of the day, they may not treat you as you'd like to be treated, but that is the exception to the rule. Most agents are successful because they're people. They know how to deal and relate to people on all different levels. So being not aggressive, but even sort of cocky with your approach to them, or being standoffish with them, isn't going to win them. Like if they've got another person that they've found a connection with, and their offer is $500 less than them, they might prompt that person and do some favors for that person to get them over the line, because the other buyer was being a real arrogant, so-and-so about dealing with them. So relationships are important. And, you know, at the end of the day, most genuine agents want to see you get into the property that you like, because in 7 to 10 years time, you might be selling. And if you had a good experience with them, that could be a listing for them as well. So it really is important to be respectful for them. If they're not giving you the time of day, that's unfortunate, but I think it's worth building a little bit of rapport and connection with them in some respects before you start to talk about pricing and negotiation and those types of things.
Yeah, because the intel in a fast market is critical. You need the agents to give as much intel as possible so you can craft your offer, and we'll talk about that shortly. But we recently bought a property, Ben, 160 groups through, 11 offers after the open. We were the second highest priced offer, and we got it because we knew how to position the contract to give the vendor what they wanted. Because, folks, here's a little sneaky one for you. The vendors, if they sell their house, are in the same boat as you are. Once they've sold it, they're looking for a property in a market with skinny listings. So consider renting it back to them. Consider giving them a long settlement so they can actually find time to get into the market. And that might be the pressure point or the hot button that's more important to them than an extra $5,000. So the intel is important. So the reason I say that, Ben, as you were saying before, don't be smart. You don't need swagger. You need to be smart is dumb and dumb is smart. Being smart is dumb and being dumb is smart, because people naturally want to help you, right? So go humble, get as much intel as you can from the agent. Don't make it personal, and be ready to act. And because, as I said, I just threw that anecdote, the top price is not always going to get it done. It's probably going to tick a lot of boxes for a lot of vendors, but it's not always what's going to get it done.
Now, you were talking before, Bryce, about the sort of the one percenters and all of the doing your DD beforehand. Let's just quickly work through some of the search and research you need to do to just tick off on a couple of important elements so you're not buying a dud.
Well, first of all, if you're buying in an area that's had precedent for floods, make sure you go and check the free, typically in most areas, free flood maps that are available with the council. Because here's a little tip. We've got an episode coming up in the future around landlords protection insurance. And interestingly, some landlord insurers will not insure you if you are in an area that has a history of flood. So you need to go and check flood maps. You need to go and have a look at the infrastructure to see what's coming so that you can maybe be in front of the curve. Have a good understanding of the zoning to see if it's, the highest and best use of the land, or if there's a particular zoning that is going to affect you. Because it's okay to be if you're in the right location, but then it's got the wrong zoning, Ben. You might be in trouble when you call your broker and say, I've just put an unconditional offer on a property, and he goes, what sort of zoning is it? And you go, mixed use, commercial, whatever. And they go, oh, that's a problem. And you go, what do you mean it's a problem? I'm pre-approved. And they say, yeah, but not for that title. Not for that zoning.
Yeah, company title, stratum title, those types of things, they impact on loan to value ratios from a lending point of view. Then you got things like population. Don't be confused by people sort of saying, oh, look, there's a huge population coming in here. There's lots of infrastructure that's going to arrive. Well, the reality is that property market will remain relatively flat for a long period of time until that infrastructure does arrive, until the fully use of that land or the most productive use of that land is realised. And then you'll start to see that land appreciate, because it's in those areas there that you won't see longer term capital growth. You might see a spike with historical low interest rates. So we always look for population growth into the major centre and tightly held, fully developed areas where the land is well utilised and the infrastructure is there, and there's more investment going into, the classic case of the whole transformation of the location. So we talk about that in terms of the change in demographics and those types of things into those areas, which are also going to put people on higher incomes as they come into those particular locations. We look at that through the ABS data. That's a little bit old now, but we've got a census coming up again in the next sort of 12 months. So that's also going to be exciting in terms of starting to see some of that new data come through. And then it is also about looking at, and I'm putting on our hat here, Bryce, but we are passionate about serving our community. We do have some research tools that help doing that. So if you go to our selectresidentialproperty.com.au, you'll see some of the application tools that are available to you, from location score to suburb growth to DSR data. There's also some, great intel in there in terms of research and so forth. So by all means, start to get some of that information together, which points you in the right direction to understand where demand is exceeding supply, where there's a higher probability for short-term capital growth. And rounding out this point here is just probably about transport. In high congested areas, access to cities, central city locations, and we also talk about you only need to do some very preliminary research all around the world. And if you look at knowledge centres and financial centres, their real estate is very expensive. Very expensive. Don't go into the second and third and fourth tier cities and try and justify, the capital growth based on that. But you go into the major cities of Melbourne, Sydney, you go to, the Bostons of this world, the New Yorks of this world, the Shanghais, the Bay, all of the big capital centres, London, those type of things, is no doubt transport remains a major reason to get into those particular centres, but they're also knowledge centres, and that's why there's always pressure on property prices in those locations.
Exactly. So our team was going through the sites that we have been. It's over 30 sites that we check at certain areas across the country, and most of them are free. So just be aware that a professional buyer is doing a lot of DD. But
can I give another little tip there, Bryce?
Yeah.
We've actually put the most extensive list together. Again, putting my picker hat on. There is a huge extensive list that you can also get access to by being a member, and it has all of the sites that our members use. So you're talking about over 3,500 members of the association have listed their preferred sites. And so it is a treasure trove of information in terms of where to go and find that. And that's downloadable in the members section of the Picker website for $5 if you want a year's membership, or for $20 for 5 years.
Mate, super value. So also be chatting to property managers at this time. Definitely be chatting to property managers at this time, because they give you super intel. We've talked about that on many other podcasts, but the property managers are going to give you intel, if you're an investor, about what it's going to take to rent a property in that market, and give you some really good insights about types of properties that rent well and don't rent well, versus not trying to bash the sales agents here, Ben, but they're amazing optimists when it comes to the properties that they've got listed. So you want a healthy level of pessimism in the discussion as well, just to make sure that you're fully informed.
Oh, it bodes well, Bryce. I mean, it's an important point, because that is the unknown in terms of the demand for rental accommodation over the next 12 months, whilst the immigration is being sorted out and the arrivals are coming back sort of probably second half of this year. So if the property manager is saying, yep, that we definitely have enough renters here to support your property from an investment point of view, that's a tick in that box as part of your due diligence.
Yeah, very good. So there you go, folks. Last thing for me is this is Veronica's term, Veronica Morgan, my co-host, but she goes, beware the rebound property. And like the rebound relationship you have, beware of the rebound property. So what that means is, if you've missed one, you're totally disappointed, you're absolutely shattered, your heart is empty. You turned up, you pictured yourself moving in, you'd mentally moved in, then someone bid more for me on the day and you don't have it. And then you just go, whatever, I'll take the next one. Beware the rebound property. So the process starts again if you miss one. Don't just go, I'll just take that one, because then you may find that your top 3 deal doers and your top 3 deal breakers get ignored. You might find that you've compromised on asset selection. You might find that you just bought into the FOMO stuff and just put your name on a title as the game, because the tide is in, folks. I said this before. So if you're swimming naked, no one's seeing right now. It's not until the tide goes back out where we'll see if you're exposed or not. So thank you, Veronica, for that term, but beware the rebound property. It's very, very important. So there you go, folks. There's a bit to think about when you go for searching, clearly understanding where you're getting these listings from, a little bit about selection, dealing with some agents, getting some free resources, talking to the property manager, and of course, beware of the rebound property. Now we want to talk about the fact that you've actually got a property. Now you've secured one, and what do you do next? And this is super important. And I'm going to get you to kick it off, Ben, because the finance topic is huge when it comes to buying in this market.
Now, when we say secured one, it means we've got our top choice. We haven't
Yes.
quite secured it yet, but so I get what you're saying.
We're in the game.
We're in the game. So we've locked on a property, we've done our DD, and we've got an idea of price. But to do that, we should have done a fair bit of due diligence beforehand. We talk about asset selection, borrowing power, cash flow management, and defence. Well, the order in which it works is actually cash flow management, borrowings, and then asset selection, and then defence, right? So we needed to have done this DD prior to really starting that search process. And that is our finance. We need to make sure that we get the finance underway. So first things first is that the banks are experiencing, here's this word, unprecedented demand. And this is on the back of the fact that several of the larger banks also had offshore processing. COVID's changed all that. They've now brought that back on board. And so they have really been spinning their wheels for months and months and months in terms of trying to keep up with the level of demand, whilst also managing, if you think about all of those mortgage deferrals and that type of work that they've been doing as well. So that has resulted in a heavy backlog of work that needs to be done with the bank to be able to get a pre-approval. In some cases, some banks are even saying that they won't issue a pre-approval through a broker because unless you've got a bona fide sale or a contract in front of them, will they actually do that? And so we are seeing and experiencing banks who are saying it's going to take up to 18 days or 25 days to pick up some files. So with that in context, when you do speak to your investment savvy mortgage broker, they are going to talk you through that process. So whilst we always say interest rate is important under best interest duty, the conversation that you may be having from an investor's point of view could also be around the speed at which your application can be processed, so you can actually have a fair shot at the property in question that you're going to be buying. That is quite important as part of the work that the broker's doing under their new obligations, which is best interest duty. In terms of the other thing that will slow you down is if you don't have your paperwork in order. So nothing's more frustrating than to provide a checklist to a prospective buyer and then basically taking 2 weeks to send all the paperwork or giving it to you in fits and spurts. It's really important that you have all of that paperwork, because a clear application, a file that's going to be picked up, an application that's going to be picked up by a credit assessor, if for some reason it is missing information, that will go into a huge pile of loans or applications that are missing information. So we need to make sure that you absolutely put a clear application together so there's no second questioning of that. Because if the credit assessor says, I need to find out more information, it might be 7 days before they pick that file up again because of the amount of work that they've got to do. So that's really important. When it comes to if you're releasing equity from an existing property, valuations are going to be important. Now, at the moment, valuers are still putting information in there around the uncertainty of COVID and probably putting in some risk rating around COVID and the uncertainty. It'll probably take about a month or two before the valuers start to be more realistic about what true valuations are on these properties, because they're waiting for those settlements to take place, as opposed to just having hearsay in terms of, one Smith Street sold for $1 million, so that's why my property's worth $1 million. But that is going to take some time. So if you are going to be releasing equity out of a property through a refinance and a pre-approval, you are talking of at least a couple of months for that process to potentially play itself out. So I'm just forewarning you. Now, there might be some lenders who are doing it quicker. That's when you can have the conversation with your investment savvy mortgage broker around what that looks like. But that is going to be a critical part. The other thing we come back to, and I'll give Bryce a shot at the title in a minute, cash flow management, buffers. So again, we want to make sure that you're not stretching yourself too far. You're holding this property for the long term. There are going to be things that potentially come up in your life, such as children, school fees, which may eat into cash flows. Some loans coming out of interest only to principal and interest. So managing all of those types of things, but just making sure you've got that adequate buffer, because again, we don't want to see people just rushing in with this FOMO expectation that it needs to happen now. It's going to be important to do that type of work. Bryce, you got any others?
Yeah, well, just sort of pressing in on a couple of your points there. What's actually happening is I've seen more low valuations this week within the landscape that we're in than I've seen for a long time. And so people need to be aware that if you're running really thin LVRs, if you're at 90%, just have an awareness around that if the valuation comes in low, you got a choice to make, right? If you're lucky enough to be subject to conditions that allow you to get out, great. But if you're not, if you don't have a buffer, you're in trouble there. And that's not to say that you've paid too much. What it is that you've got 20 people all interested, 11 offers. Yours was $2,000 more than the person who was underneath you, and there's probably 4 backup contracts, within $5,000. But the valuers don't have the comparable sales to actually back up the price at some point. Now, most valuers that we've chatted to, their goal is to come in at contract price unless there's serious red flags. But in this market, it is hot. You might be getting conservative valuers. So that's important that you have the buffer that Ben talked about before. And if you don't, if you're chasing hard, that is something that you need to be aware of in this market, that may be the case. And it may be an oxymoron that you need to put in a condition that actually protects you from that. But that condition also is the reason why you don't get the property. So there is a balancing act that you need to play here. But quite literally, this finance part is so incredibly crucial right now. My team is staying very, very close to the mortgage crew when they're making negotiations. So if you've had a pre-approval done with your mortgage broker or your bank, and that was late last year and you haven't had a conversation with them, you need to have a conversation with them at the very least at the 11th hour before you put in an offer, but don't have a conversation with them after you've put in an offer, because you absolutely need to shore up your finance. You need to make sure it hasn't changed, because as Ben said, the files aren't being picked up for a long time. And if it's not a clean one, you go to the bottom of the pile. So think about that. Banks are still, I know they sometimes feel inhuman, but banks are full of humans. And so a real person is going to pick up your file, and they're going to see if you've given everything you need in that for them to make an assessment. If you haven't, then it's just going to be, I'm just going to put that on the pile and deal with it later. It needs to be clean.
They're triaging deals. So there's the same way in a situation where you've got too much work and you need to prioritize your order. The triage goes like this. First of all, pre-approvals get triaged away. Because you don't know, how active they are going to be, and obviously they last for 90 days. So you got to keep getting another pre-approval under the current rules of responsible lending. Then it's purchase is always number one. So if there's a purchase contract, that will go straight to the top of the queue to make sure that gets done. Now that said, if you're trying to get a shorter settlement, they will be really tricky, and you may be late on settlement. Now that's the last thing you want to do in some cities and some states. If you are late on settlement, they can potentially void the contract. So it's really, especially Queensland, are very good at that. If they think they can get another buyer who wants to pay more a month down the track because you weren't able to get settlement done. So it's really important that you talk to your broker about confidence around 30-day settlements. Anything shorter than that, in reality, you need to probably have big lines of credit or not have to worry about waiting for the bank to get to that particular thing, because it does come back to that triaging of what they're going to do. Now, if they've got to triage a refinance before a purchase, that refinance is basically still sitting in a queue, and that's where it becomes really, really challenging. So we're just sort of giving everyone a warning around the banks are experiencing this high level of demand in a COVID or pandemic environment where they're also juggling other elements of their business. So some consideration around that in your preparation and your timing will be really, really important. Because we do know that when you do have confidence in your finance, the terms that you're going to be using, and we'll be talking about offer in next week, so taking a deep dive into that. But those terms are going to be, having confidence around your finance where you may not have to be subject to finance is going to be one of those things that allows you to act at speed, which is what Bryce was telling you about earlier. So that's an important one. The other due diligence, we've got a couple of other points that we want to get in. Let's talk about deposits, Bryce.
Yeah, so kind of leaning on one point is shorter settlements are very tricky for all the reasons we talked about before, but experienced negotiators know how to deal with that because the game is to secure the property and then deal with the negotiation later. So that's important, and that's a big surf game that you're playing. That's for the people who can play in the big surf. They know how to paddle out there, because that's not for the faint-hearted to mess around with short settlements and then being able to negotiate that. That's a relationship exercise. But the important point is the banks can't handle short settlements. So if short settlements are offered, then we need to be able to play the game really, really well. Because my final point on that is terms are winning everything. Did you hear that, folks? Terms are the game here. It's not necessarily just about price. It's about terms. I used the anecdote before, and multiple anecdotes I could pull up, Ben, where we haven't been the highest price, but we've been the best. We've been the highest price, best terms combination, which helps us get it over the line. So the deposit is clear. Be clear on where it's coming from, because folks, if you're going to put a contract in, experienced people know this is a no-brainer, but it's the new to the games that don't. That if you are putting in a offer, you are going to have to stump up the deposit within cooee of the offer. Sometimes it's straight away, sometimes it's within 24 hours, and everything in between. If you're in Queensland, you can put $1,000 and put a balance when it goes unconditional. There's a whole range of permutations. But ultimately, you are going to need to come up with a deposit prior to settlement. In 90% of the cases, significantly prior to settlement. So if you're planning on finance encapsulating everything, but you have no liquid access to funds to be able to stump up a deposit, you will be in breach of contract. And in a fast market, an agent will definitely on-sell it, but you also run the risk of losing deposits in certain circumstances. So be clear about where it is coming from. Is it released equity? Is it cash? Or is it unreleased equity? Because that unreleased equity is the enemy here, because you won't be able to get access to it. And secondly, how quickly can you access it? I can't tell you how many times I've put a deal together, Ben, where cash is liquid, no problem, but it's in an account that they can't access for 72 hours.
I've got to break my term deposit, Bryce, and it's only 4 days away from breaking my term deposit. Should I? It's like, yep, you need to break it.
You need to get it out, right? So where is it coming from, and can you get access to it tonight? If you're putting a deal in today, can you get access to it tonight? Because if you can't, stay out of the big surf, because you're going to get burnt from doing that. So the deposit is really, really important. As I said, the intermediate and the experienced, they know this is a no-brainer, but I've seen it catch first-time investors, first-time buyers, those who haven't done it for a long time. It catches them all the time, because I think, I'm good for it. The bank said I'm good for it. Look, they said I can do that purchase price, but where are you getting the deposit from? Well, at settlement, we'll munge it all together, and we'll end up having all funds together, all cross-collateralized. But we'll have the funds. No, you're not in the game if you can't get access to your deposit. So, folks, be very, very clear on what that looks like for you.
Now, I'll touch quickly just on loan-to-value ratios in the context of a tough buying market. Bryce mentioned it a moment ago. If valuations are coming in short, you need to have a stretch or a backup in terms of what that looks like. Under auction conditions, it's unlikely that a contract will come in short. A valuation will come in short, but that is just part of the game, unfortunately. Now, you obviously can shop around to different lenders who will use potentially different valuers. And we've talked about this before, where one valuer will see a property worth $880, another valuer will think that property is worth $920. And they're looking at exactly the same property, but they're potentially looking at different comps. So that's also important. You can't, in a market like we're in at the moment, getting a pre-valuation to get confidence around what the property is going to sell for, you're kidding yourself, right? Absolutely. You're wasting your money in getting a valuer to value that property for you.
And computer-generated reports.
They're just a waste of time.
Just an algorithm. It's not a science.
In a market like this, go back to what Bryce said earlier in this episode, which was study the market. You can potentially develop expertise and a sense of value. Make sure you're proportioning the land and the improvements accordingly in terms of the higher the land content, the higher the value that you'll most likely achieve. And obviously then the livability of the property is going to play a role in that, as is aspect, location, busy roads, etc. But coming back to loan to value ratio, all this work will be done with your investment savvy mortgage broker in terms of the pros and cons of going into LMI versus not going into LMI. We've talked about that before.
Lender's mortgage insurance, folks.
Yes.
LMI.
If the lender's mortgage, because when your LVR is greater than 80%, that's what you have to pay. And we talk about it. If a market's moving quicker than you can save, in some instances, that would be better to go into the market and pay that little bit of LMI. If you're an investor who's paying that LMI, it's tax deductible over 5 years. But that's enough said on LMI. Contract reviews, Bryce.
Yes, and make sure you buy, we talked about it before, make sure you buy properties there where the titles stack up. Contract reviews, we say to clients, so I'll do it through the perspective of that. We don't pretend that we're experts in legal matters. And look, to be honest, we can look at a Section 32 in Victoria, we can look at a contract in Sydney, we can look at disclosure statements in Queensland, we can look at the Form 1s in Adelaide. We're familiar with it, right? But we never, ever position ourselves as an expert in legal matters, even though we're looking at hundreds of contracts a month, hundreds of these things. So if we're at that volume and we never position ourselves as a professional buyer, that you should take information from us around contracts, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you give it to a conveyancer or a solicitor and ask them to do a contract review? Because you need red flags brought up now. You need them before you enter into an unconditional contract, because those red flags are important. And it's important to be clear that the solicitors are going to ask you to do certain reviews or certain searches, and some of them will give you a big laundry list of all the searches that are available. So you need to ask them what is appropriate. What are the baseline foundational searches that I need to do, and what do you think is appropriate for me to do? Because you've got the balance between you can do every search under the sun and it'll cost you a fortune versus minimum cost, and you might miss out on something if there's been a planning application that's been missed, or if there's something that the council has said on the property that a search would actually uncover. There's a bit of that going on. So take advice from the people who are experts of this stuff. Talk to a conveyancer in advance. We talked about last week about getting your team. Get on the phone. Hey, if I find a contract, will you do a review? Yes, no. Will it cost me anything? Yes or no. What is your turnaround time? Because quite often some conveyancers are human resourced in a way that they might not be able to turn it around quickly enough for you. Or generally speaking, we get a lot of reviews, contract reviews on a Thursday or a Friday. Now, if they're like, not likely to get one done on a Friday, we're busy doing settlements, that is actually okay because that's their business. But it's not okay for you as the buyer if you're in a fast, speed-moving market and you need to get a contract review done and you can't get it done quick enough, and then you go in and effectively go on a blind date because you don't know what you're getting into, that's not okay. So these are some of the questions that you need to be having in advance. But folks, a buyer's agent who is at the top of their game, who is an expert in their craft, will generally tell their client two things. We are not a legal expert. We are not a building expert. You need to outsource those two things to experts. You need to get it to a conveyancer or a solicitor. You need to get a builder in to check it out. That is something that we are not prepared to put our reputation on. So I'm selling these stories, Ben. We've been in the game for a long, long time, and we don't even pretend that we're experts in some of these things that we're looking at day in, day out.
Mandatory price, mandatory building inspections, mandatory contract reviews, all part of what we do in terms of our DD. So if we're doing it, as you say, as professionals, you've got to expect to do that. Now, I'll add on the contract reviews, make sure that they're giving you the value that you need in those. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars. So if you have to pay for it, not a bad thing, right? Because effectively that's a formal review. In terms of same with building and inspections, we need speed on that inspection, and we need red flags on that inspection. And again, we've talked in detail about being in inspections in the past. We've even had Paul on the show talking about some of the interesting things to be aware of in terms of structural defects and all of those types of things. We've had several people on. So we're talking in this, you must get a building inspection done, and you must get it done quickly, and you must get the view from the building inspector in terms of, what do you think? What do you
And
think?
FOMO alert, Ben. I've got a FOMO alert. Take off your rose-colored glasses.
Yeah.
Because if you're emotionally attached to a property, you're in a hot market, they're hard to come by, and then you get news from the building inspector that isn't positive, you could put your rose-colored glasses on and take shortcuts and ignore that. Be prepared to walk away if the building inspection or the contract review covers red flags. Yellow flags, gotcha. Just deal with them maturely, seek advice. Green flags are fine, but red flags, don't have your rose-colored glasses on with those. Now, building inspections, let's be honest, we are buying imperfect assets. We're not buying paper assets. We're buying real things. Some cases have been standing for 100 years or more. So there will be problems with the real estate you buy. You've just got to work out if it's major or minor. You've got to work out if it's a deal breaker or if it's a negotiation point. But red flags, ignore them at your peril. The last one for me on this, Ben, is in this market, you might not get a lot of choice. You might, in an ideal world, you see a few properties, but your perfect property, if you're owner occupier, or the ideal property if you're an investor, might come up quickly, and you might not be able to compare to months gone by. So you just got to jump in if it's appropriate. If you've done all the things, assets like you're not compromising on anything, you've done all the DD we've talked about, all the search parameters. You want to jump, you want to act in this market. He who hesitates is lost. My dad said that to me all the time when he was teaching me to drive. He who hesitates is lost. So it equally applies here when you're buying. If you hesitate, someone will take your place. So you need to be able to be confident and be able to jump in when you can. And I will say it's not for the faint-hearted. No. It is a hot market, and it is not for the faint-hearted. If you're fearful, or seek the advice of someone who can help you, because there is a bit to navigate here. Notwithstanding, for a lot of people, an enormous emotional load that goes on just from buying real estate. So,
irrational exuberance, avoid it as much as you can, right? That FOMO and irrational exuberance is going to play a role here. Now, what I'm talking about there is in a sound mind, an investor should never get a 10 out of 10 property. That should always go to an owner-occupier because they're buying with their emotional purchasing power. If the investor's willing to gazump that, then in reality, they're probably paying overs, and they might be paying 2023 prices right now. They're playing the long game. That's their judgment call on it. So we will always be saying that assets that are a 7 is under consideration, but usually 8s and 9s is what we're looking for to get on the coattails of the owner-occupier. So just bear that in mind in terms of when you're going out there, because if you are that investor who will just simply pay anything for any property, well, you got more money, good luck to you, but than sense potentially. So good luck to you. But we would also say try and keep it into perspective. If you're going to buy for investment purposes for owner occupiers, well, it's tough out there. We get it. And so, hopefully some of this information is allowing you to put your own questions together and answering those questions so you can be more informed and make a smarter decision.
Well said. There you go, folks. We've helped you with a bit of intel on search and due diligence. Next week, we'll talk about the offer going in. We're going to tie this in a bow, wrap it up, summarize, and hopefully part of the three-part series will help you position yourself and get better informed around how to play in this market. So bit going on there, Ben, but we're sure that will land for a lot of folks, and hopefully the experienced folks, it's just a reinforcement of some key principles for them on how to navigate this market.
Brilliant.
Hey, my life hack this week is, if you're new to our community, there's 2 ways to actually catch up. And we're at episode 326 today. So, we've got listeners who have cut 2 laps, Ben, which is phenomenal. But right, people who have joined us in the last 1 or 2 years, for a lot of people, it's hard to catch up. So there's 2 ways that you can. There's 20 episodes at the beginning that I always encourage at the end of every episode to go back and have a listen to. Now, if you're time poor, you can actually download the summary, so you can see that at thepropertycatch.com.au/TPC20. But there's also another little hack here, Ben, if you have a particular topic, because we've referenced, we've talked about that before in a previous episode. We've talked about that in a previous episode. And so those new to the community, I go, yeah, that's fair enough. But some of the titles of our episode don't give you enough clues on what it is.
Yeah.
So what the team have done is whenever we do the show notes, there's a lot of detail in the show notes. If you go back to our website with key items, key points we cover. So there's a little search function on the propertycouch.com.au at the top right-hand side. It's a little magnifying glass. You click on that and just type in a keyword, because we've tagged a lot of our episodes. We've got lots of detail within the episodes. So that can be a resource to help people navigate 326 episodes so that they can actually fast track the ones that they need to listen to in this hot market. You talked about the Paul Baker episode. People can go in there and they can just type in building inspections, and his episode will pop up and they can listen to that, probably at 2 speed, because everything's about speed at the moment, Ben. But that's my life hack today for our community, to go to our website, use that search function, and actually look for some keywords so that you might be able to find 6 or 7 episodes that you need to circle back to in our back catalogue that can actually help you. So
it's a great tip. If you want to learn fast, that's the best way to learn fast. If you're unsure about a particular definition or what does that mean, just search that and you'll get to that content real quick, and then you'll build your knowledge faster. So, well, that's probably one of your best life hacks, mate.
Oh, mate, compliments. You don't dish them out often, so I'll take that. Hey, what's making property news?
Oh, a couple of quick ones. This week we released a report. So we do monthly reports called In Data We Trust. So I'm even talking about us making the news here through Select Residential Property. But Jeremy's done a nice little article on where boom conditions are emerging.
Yeah, I saw it.
And it's got some good insights, not only into the capital city markets, but also into some of those regional markets. And it gives you a nice story of how we measure demand and supply. So check that out. And obviously you can subscribe to that so it can hit your inbox every month. That's the
Well, how they can subscribe to it, Ben, is super simply. They can go to Location Score. There's a free suburb, so they can just check out their own suburb. And by nature of checking that out, we'll have your email address and we'll send it over to you.
That's right. So, and there's also on the Select Residential Property parent site, there's also join the membership area where we have not only this, but we also publish what we call suburbs ups and downs, which is tracking the number of suburbs that are growing in value versus the number of suburbs that are declining in value on a monthly basis as well. So we've got a couple of little fun, research tools there available as well. The next bit of news that I thought was just important, it was quite extraordinary, Bryce, that we went into lockdown last Friday and the preliminary clearance rate for auctions in Melbourne was 88%. Obviously there was a few withdrawn and that number will come down, but they obviously virtual auctions, right? And and people bought properties virtually. They weren't even, that's how much Melbourne is the auction capital of the world. So just a quick one. We've got our first Super Saturday, which is this Saturday now that we're open again, where we've got effectively 1,094 properties going to auction. So, it's going to be, let's face it, the news is going to be all property come Saturday night and Sunday from all of the news reporters. So we love it. Australians have an affiliation and an addiction almost to property. So we expect to see that.
What a resilient industry, right? Hey, Ben, like you've got real estate agents don't rank very highly on the trust surveys, but they'd have to rank very highly on resilience and moving, pivoting and making stuff happen. Like that's remarkable.
Australia, we love property. It's a great Australian dream. We understand it, but also it happens for other people like Robbie Williams, who's decided to buy a dream villa in Switzerland for $42.9 million. And that's a story you can also see in realestate.com.au this week. So it's just check out what Robbie's buying for a lazy 42.9.
Were you the underbidder?
Yeah, I was the first underbidder, Bryce. So I was 9,964 when I offered 425,000 for the same villa. But it had nice lake view. So what could I do?
Yeah.
So that's what's making property news. But there will be more to report in terms of just watching that auction clearance rate over the coming weeks and months in terms of where the market's going.
Yeah, absolutely. So there you go, folks. We know it was a big episode. Thanks for hanging in there. Hopefully that's been of benefit to you the last 2 weeks of our 3-part series preparing you for buying in a hot market. We will wrap it up next week, bring it all home, let you know any of the anecdotes that we've collected through the week, through the team buying on the ground. And so Ben, until next week, part 3.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it in a hot market.
See you next week, folks.
Hey there folks, Bryce Holdaway here. Before you go, if you're new to our community and only listened to maybe a handful of episodes, I thoroughly recommend that you go all the way back to episode number 1, where we unpack all of the foundations when it comes to property investing. Now for those of you that might be a little bit time poor, I've got good news for you. We have a binge guide that you can download straight away, which summarizes the first 20 episodes where Ben and I unpack the foundational pillars of the A, B, C, D, and so much more. And you can get that straight away. If you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20, you can download it and consume it whenever you want. It's completely free and available now. And for those of you, just a quick reminder that nothing we've spoken about today constitutes financial advice. We recommend that you reach out to your licensed professional advisor so that you can look at your unique circumstances before acting on any information. Now don't forget, go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20 and get your binge guide today.